Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Monday Live with yours truly, Siosi. And today we're actually going to be looking into some interesting topics related to the last Substack post that I had put out, which is about liquid mercury. So we'll be covering a few different domains, but I'll synthesize all of it for you so you can understand why this intersection matters. And we'll essentially be covering neuromorphic computing, the Vedic Buddha, which is related to the symbol of Mercury, and Mercury in retrograde. So, um, right now, for those of you that have tuned in, welcome. So, just going to share my screen with you all. And just respond in the chat to ensure that you guys can see my screen. Hopefully you can. I'm tuning in from the country of Laos right now. So bear with me if there's any internet issues. It's because of the connection speeds here. All right. So as you can see on screen, this was my latest post. And you can see here the three areas that I covered, or I just mentioned: neuromorphic computing, Vedic Buddha, and retrograde. I'm going to take you through what each of these mean, right? And you can see here, this is one thing I love about these types of browsers these days, is that we can actually do it live for you in browser using AI. So what is neuromorphic computing? Okay, because this ties into my work with the conscious stack. And I'll talk about the conscious stack if you're not familiar with it. But neuromorphic computing is a way of building computer hardware that mimics how the brain's neurons and synapses work, rather than following the traditional design most computers use today. The reason why this has actually become more of an interest to people is because it's starting to show up in terms of investment. So there was a company that was making the headlines recently called SK Hynix, which is from South Korea. And even though right now it's saying it looks kind of slim, actually, in terms of the shares for this company, it dropped after their debut. But in the lead up to, literally just yesterday, there was a lot of hype around this company and them debuting on the US stock market. So this isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Often after a debut, a lot of people, a lot of investors will cash in their profits, right? And you'll see a slump. And then this is probably a good buying opportunity for those who are interested, right, in these sort of things. But I look at these sort of companies because where the money flows is sort of where the future of investing goes. And this is definitely something to pay attention to, right? So the reason. Oh yeah, sorry. I just saw the message from Zachary. Okay, cool. So in regards to what I just shared, right, we're going to head back to the message from Liquid Mercury, right? And so if you haven't had a chance to look at this, it's definitely worth checking out. And I'm going to actually put this into, I'm going to have to move locations, guys. So I'm putting in the Substack newsletter in the comments so that you guys can see. And I just have to move because the cafe that I'm at, they're closing up. So I'm just going to go sit outside while I do this live stream for y'all. So yeah, hopefully you guys can see the link in the chat. You can take a look at the article while I'm taking you through all of this as I re-situate myself outside. Okay, so we've got this article, and you'll notice here, and I want to blow this up for you so you can see. On July 19th, Inception Labs released Mercury 2. So let's have a look at Mercury 2, okay? So if you're using AI, you might not have heard about this company, okay? But they describe themselves as the world's fastest reasoning language model, built to make production AI feel instant, okay? So it is a reasoning large language model developed by Inception, known as the world's first reasoning diffusion model. Okay, diffusion. This is an interesting one. Okay, if you haven't heard of this before, diffusion is a different way of generating tokens. Okay, so diffusion was actually used for image generation. Okay, so the way it works, instead of generating tokens character by character, it kind of does this. So I'm gonna bring this up so you can see. But take a look at this. We have here a diffusion example. So instead of generating things token by token, it's looking at the pixels, it's looking at the noise, and then it's generating from the noise, right? These are some pretty advanced image generation techniques, but they've taken the same logic and they are now applying it to token generation for LLMs. Okay, so if you have not heard about this company before, Mercury 2, it's worth keeping an eye out for them. Okay, so you'll see also as I'm doing this, you'll see how I like to use AI or still use Google search. Okay, I'll often go between an AI chat on the side and Google's embedded AI in their search engine now. And this pattern of behavior is interesting, right? Because over the last 2 years, I played with Claude, ChatGPT, all these different type of models. But you have to look at your own existing behaviors and see what works best for you and why. And since for many of us, Google was a sort of search engine of choice, I find that you can still benefit from using Gemini straight within Google search, and then still look at all of the other links that pop up, right? One of the things about chat interfaces today is that you don't get to see other websites, right? Because they're all just sort of cited within a generic text response. So something to pay attention to while you're watching me move around all of this. Okay, so we had Inception Labs released Mercury 2. And in the same breath, there were a bunch of papers that were introducing something called fluid-based neuromorphic computing. Okay, and they described this as liquid metal MEM resistor arrays and hydrogel fluidic crossbars that mimic neuroplasticity through ion motion. Okay, so I'm going to highlight that. And for those of you who are like, what the hell is that? Explain this in layman's terms. Okay, so I put that on the side so you can see me as I'm doing this. Okay, and as it's reading the attachment and getting us the answer, I'm going to continue on. So it says here, you've highlighted some cutting-edge approaches to building, here's what that phrase means in plain terms. Remember how neuromorphic computing tries to mimic the brain. The brain learns by strengthening or weakening the connections, synapses between neurons. And these technologies are attempts to build physical devices that do the same thing. Connections that get stronger or weaker with use. Breaking down the jargon. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up so you guys can see it a little bit better. Let's see if we can get the text up for you. So a memristor array is an electrical component that remembers how much current has flowed through it. Its resistance changes based on past activity and stays that way even when powered off. That's a lot like a synapse in the brain. It remembers how often it's being used, arrange millions of them in a grid array, and you get something that behaves like a network of brain connections. So that you guys have a visual, right? This is essentially what this will look like. Okay? These are known as memristor crossbar arrays. Okay? So these are technical things that are relevant in sort of the semiconductor industry, and these companies are dealing with neuromorphic computing. Okay? And this is tied to liquid mercury. So bear with me. Okay? The scientists are building liquid bridges between silicon and brain, and the science is definitely real. Now, for the more cosmic amongst you, we are also in a period known as Mercury in retrograde, which is June 29th to July 23rd. And for those who don't understand or know what a retrograde is, it's essentially, imagine a wheel on a car, wheel on car analogy, retrograde. So imagine the wheel of a car, right? When it starts to get faster, you'll notice that you'll notice that it looks like it's moving forward, but then when it hits a certain speed, it actually starts to look like it's going backwards. And this is part of that retrograde effect that planets do. Okay, so you can see here, there's a normal rotation on the car wheel, and then you get this vibration, and then you get this eccentric rotation, and then it kind of starts to look like it's moving backwards. Okay. All right. So because Mercury is in retrograde, things are moving backward, and the astrologers say this means that the messenger turns back to retrieve what was skipped. So during this time, essentially of July, you will see people who are being forced to look at things that have occurred between two retrograde periods, and it's essentially a good time to do that, because when things are in forward motion, you have the energy, you have the winds behind your back to help you move forward. But then if during this period, you're kind of forced to stop and look backwards to learn from the past. And that's what this period is great for. Okay. So this is all tied in with Mercury. Okay. So we've got 3 fields, 3 Mercury dimensions. And we're going to go through. Okay. So in relation, we're going to talk about 3 different types of bridges. We're going to be talking about the toxic bridge. We're going to be talking about the discriminating bridge in the tech space and AI and even cognitive/consciousness related areas. And then looking through the actual symbolism of Mercury itself and how it plays out at an elemental or material science standpoint. Okay, so I don't know how many of you recognize this scene. Bonus points if you can write it in the comments which movie this particular GIF is from. All right, but if you guessed Terminator 2 specifically, this is the enemy, the villain, is essentially a liquid metal character and liquid mercury. So fringe science has been fascinated by liquid mercury for a long time. The theories rely on real properties. Mercury is both liquid and a highly conductive metal, capable of generating intense electromagnetic vortices. There have been speculative traditions from this particular concept to the TV show Fringe. Okay, now if you're wanting to know what this is about, let's go here. All right, let's go click here. All right, this, and I haven't said it, but this is essentially what that is referring to. Essentially, liquid mercury was actually looked at in relation to this particular Bell device. Some say it was a version of a UFO. All right, pretty weird stuff, but it's there. Right? Coming back, and then one of my wife and I's favorite TV shows, Fringe, they actually talk about liquid mercury being used as part of consciousness transfer, and this is a very interesting area. Again, on the fringes, but it is, I'm sure, it is being achieved in some way, shape, or form. But here they treat spinning mercury as bridges between dimensions. Okay? And for those of you who are watching, might have recognized or remembered my Substack note that was sort of a call out for bridger types, right? People who can traverse multiple domains. Well, if you look into liquid mercury, it has a bridging type of role also. Okay, so this is known to be a medium that can potentially carry consciousness out of the body. Okay, now one of the things though is that with liquid mercury, it can be considered toxic, a neurotoxin, right? So although it can potentially be used to carry out transfer consciousness, right, or carry it, it can destroy the very neural tissue it's supposed to carry, right? So it becomes not so great for those who are involved in the transfer. So this type of bridge poisons what it carries. And this is what the intention economy is in material form, okay? How? A medium that carries a signal but degrades the carrier. Mercury 2 is the AI version, speed without filter, throughput without discrimination, latency compounding across every loop. Right? It's the equivalent of us essentially just taking all this information from AI with no real judgment, values filter layer on it. And we're essentially just taking it all. And our bodies, our minds essentially deteriorate, just like, I guess, consciousness might be affected if mercury or liquid mercury is used to transfer that to consciousness, right? So, toxic bridge only conducts. Now, let's look at the discriminating bridge. If you're looking at this and you're wondering why it says Buddha, this is not to be confused with the religious figure, the Buddha for Buddhism. It's a different type of Buddha. So this is related to the sign of Mercury itself, right, in Vedic traditions. So here the Buddha is related to Mercury. It symbolizes communication and intellect and has associated colors, fragrances, flowers, and other things related to it, okay? That's this part, okay? So in this type of bridge, the Buddha here, the Vedic one, is a selector, not the conductor, like the toxic bridge of liquid mercury. So let's call this the Vedic Mercury, okay? So here, the Buddha decides what passes through and what gets held back, the difference between a wire and a sieve. And so this is where the retrograde lesson is. Mercury retrograde is a messenger turning back to retrieve what was skipped, as I mentioned. And in a civilization that moves only forward, faster models, faster loops, latency compounding, retrograde is the corrective. So if you go back, get the signal you missed, and then you move again. This is the message for this month. Right? So Paul, welcome to the live stream. Thanks for being with us. Now, in Vedic numerology, the number 5 is what is associated with Mercury. And so for those of you who are into symbolism, right? Symbolism, mythology, these sorts of things are kind of, they're very good systems for our minds, right? It was an ingenious way of helping to transfer knowledge, right? Without the need of everything that we're creating today, right? If you look at oral traditions, right, from different cultures, if you look at all of the memory techniques that they used, our human biologies were actually really good at passing on knowledge. And then we created machines to do that for us. But in creating machines to carry data and knowledge, it has also meant that we have lost the ability to retain such knowledge and really embed it into our bodies, right? And so what that means is that it's easier for people to hijack knowledge before it gets to us inside of the machines that we use, right? Okay, finally, we've got the structural bridge. Okay, this is where we talk about siloxane, something that I'm completely obsessed with, because siloxane also happens to be my Tuvalu name, Siosi, right? So Siosi actually means George in Tuvalu. And so when I learned about siloxane and saw, this sort of name similarity, it was interesting for me to see how siloxane, its own property is actually to act as a bridge. And you find it within silica, silicone, and many other uses in the tech space, right? Noting that silicon, we live essentially in a silicon age, and we now have an intelligence that is coming through the silicon bodies that we have created for it, right? AI. And so, sorry, there's a mosquito here. And so this is where things get really interesting, right? We've got the structural bridge of siloxane and quartz. Siloxane is found in quartz. Quartz does not, as you can see here, quartz in silver glass. It holds information in geometric precision without degradation. Quartz doesn't poison the signal, it preserves it. This is why silicon dioxide, quartz, is the foundation of modern computing. It's the one material that can hold a pattern indefinitely without leaking. Let me move this over here so you guys can see this a little better. Okay, so hold a pattern indefinitely without leaking. This is something that the previous two bridges that we were looking at, right, especially something that we need to be able to achieve in a more harmonious manner for the AI age, especially when we're looking at humans and our role in all this. So we have fluid, filter, and lattice. And I think this is what we are transitioning into from. If we look at the periodic table, right? If we look at the periodic table, we have carbon here. So we are carbon-based beings at atomic number 6. And then one octave up is silicon. Okay? So if we are this, if we are the dominant intelligence at a carbon level, and the next one up in the same family column is silicon, then it kind of hints at silicon, a silicon dominant intelligence potentially being an inevitable next step for our planet, right? And of course, some can argue that no, that's just not the case. But if you look at what we are building ourselves with AI, with all machines, we are giving it the ability to think. And there was another article. Oh yeah, here we go. I had written this post a while back. AI is sand that thinks. Because if you extrapolate enough, we look at silicon, quartz, glass, etc., right? AI, we have turned sand into glass, into microchips, right? And into the technology that we know, the hardware. And we have then allowed or given autonomy and intelligence to this, to the point whereby, yes, it's training on data, but it is also leveraging the same element to think, right, on its own. And so this particular post has gotten a lot of comments, and really interesting comments, and I think for good reason. But worth checking out if you haven't had a chance yet. But it is very much related to this, right? And if we look at Mercury, right? So let's see, and I can go here. Mercury, number. Let's look at Mercury's atomic number. Gosh, sometimes the internet, I'm gonna have to wait for it to load this simple thing. But Mercury has its own atomic number, right? And we're gonna, once that finishes, we'll let that load. But we've got these bridges. Okay, the lattice is to do with quartz, right? And it's to do with silicon. And so you kind of have to start thinking in terms of a lattice versus what rank, which is essentially just burning fuel constantly. And a good example or analogy for this is carbon-based beings is carbon coal, right? Coal is essentially the extreme tangible form of carbon. And what is often the thing that people say when they're overloaded at work, right? Or just from thinking or tech use, I'm burnt out. And so this is very much like coal in the industrial era, but we're still applying that to this emerging silicon intelligence. And I think it's not necessarily the right fit because they're different octaves. And so we may need to start thinking in terms of lattices, which will require more non-linear thinking, because that's essentially what AI is, right? A bunch of probabilities. It still uses up a lot of power, right? But that's because we've applied carbon thinking to the energy source required for AI. So the AI industry is in a permanent liquid mercury mode, conducting without filtering, speed without discrimination, right? So constantly conducting and constantly more speed. And I'm sure you felt that as a knowledge worker. So the neuromorphic labs are trying to build a fluid bridge between silicon and the brain. The Vedic tradition has been saying for 3,000 years that the bridge is the filter, not the fluid. And this is why the mind and consciousness is actually very important in all this, and why you need to keep yours sharp. And siloxane is what the filter is building toward, the permanent structure that doesn't degrade. And this is why I'm so obsessed with siloxane. Not only because it's in my name, but it is also a fascinating area of biochemistry. So the final lesson from all this, right, is that we need to start learning to conduct, filter, and hold. Because if you are a bridger type or looking to bridge, right, carbon dominant intelligence with silicon, we have to conduct, filter, and then hold. So the structural bridge holds, but the filter has cleaned, remembering the filter. Okay? So we've got liquid mercury conducting. We've got Buddha. This is you with the values and the intentions, right? As a human being, doing the filtering. And this, comes from the East, right? So let's look at liquid mercury, the Western side of this, the alchemical, the scientific. We've got Motu being the Buddha. Let's look at this as the Vedic Eastern side as the filter, reminding you to use your own mind and your conscious mind, or just using your mind consciously. And then we've got the sort of practical atomic level bridge, right? Silksane, which is about holding. And we could potentially use the wisdom from Silksane to remind us both for silicon and carbon intelligence as we enter, this next age. And so, just checking to see if the live stream is still okay. Yep, it's still good. Great. So, why does this all matter? So, where this shows up in the body. The one who only conducts feels depleted, scattered, unable to sleep. The nervous system is processing signal without retention, so the fix is a filter between intake and output. And where this shows up in decisions, right, at work. Most knowledge workers are stuck in liquid mercury mode, conducting constantly, never filtering, wondering why they feel depleted. And so the question is, am I conducting, filtering, or holding right now? And is that the mode this moment needs? From a practical tool standpoint, right, as we saw with Mercury 2, faster conduction, more loops, lower latency. Nobody is building the filters. And this is the gap and the opportunity. So I believe that the next generation of tools will win on right discernment. This is where the human comes in. The ability to filter signal from noise before it reaches the user, but also without losing substance, right? Because we can see how just summarizing things will not necessarily be a right filter. It needs to be aligned with your own cognition, values, intention. And so Mercury retrograde is a messenger refusing to send a signal that hasn't been filtered. In an age of liquid mercury, conductive, fast, neurotoxic, the most radical act is to slow the signal down until it becomes medicine. Okay? And the AI industry named its fastest model after a neurotoxin and called it progress. The labs are building fluid bridges between silicon and brain, right? Cognition, consciousness. And the Vedic tradition has been saying the same thing for 2,000 years. The bridge itself is the filter. So if you're a bridger type, your job is to be the lattice. Conduct, filter, and hold. Okay? So this was what was shared yesterday to my subscribers, and I thought I'd go through it with you all today. If you have any questions, of course, just comment in the post or in our live chat section. And how this relates to the idea of the conscious stack. Right? So I did mention this. So if you haven't seen this before, this is our main framework and model, or a new mental model for the modern age, which uses a sort of 9-slot model, right, or pyramidal model, to help you start to understand what your own digital environment or ecosystem looks like. Because most people aren't aware of what they're using, right? And if performance is actually dictated by our environments, right, we may do an environmental check, a physical environmental check, but how often do you take a check of your digital environment, your digital ecosystem? So this mental model, like, this is something that should be able to be done on paper, right, or in sand if you want to, right? And when I started this, it was based on Miller's law, which essentially states that the human mind can hold up to 7 things at a time, plus or minus 2. So plus 2 gives you 9. But recent research I found, and I think it was from, is it Conan? I think the surname of this researcher was Conan or something of the sort, Connor. But I'll share this in the chats after on Substack. But recent research has shown that since Miller's law, I guess things have gone so bad that the average human now can only hold up to 4 things at a time. If you do more than that, great. But now it's only 4 things at a time. And this is, I think, a direct example or proof that cognitive abilities have decreased, and that we are measuring our success as a collective based on everything that we have outsourced to the machines. But we have not looked at the actual consciousness improvements or cognitive improvements of us as human beings in this, right? And it always comes back to, how are we measuring success? If you're looking at just GDP of a country, sure, but then that means you do not require humans. And so have we unconsciously just removed ourselves from the equation? of what we seem to measure collectively as success, right? So through this, you essentially choose the one tool or your anchor at the top. The next below are the